I love that last song because it proclaims something, that it's not just a feeling that we have that Jesus has risen from the dead, but it's an actual fact of reality. We worship a risen Savior, and the fact that we live in a world in which Jesus Christ has risen from the dead gives us hope even when times seem hopeless. And that's what the passage on which this conference is based, 1 Peter 3:15, is all about. It tells us to be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have and to do it with gentleness and respect. Now, you Canadians like the gentleness and respect part. We Americans like the go get 'em after, let's drop the mic kind of thing. But notice what he says. He doesn't just say be ready to give an answer. He says do it with gentleness and respect. If we default to gentleness and respect but don't know how to give an answer, then we're not really doing what God calls us to do. If we know how to give an answer but we're jerks about it, then we don't really know how to do what God's called us to do. And so if you've got a piece of paper, and some of you look like you're note takers, I'm going to give you an art assignment right off the bat here. If you remember nothing else, just remember this from today. I want you to draw your best version of a DNA double helix on your piece of paper. All you have to do is draw a squiggly line going this way, and then make a squiggly line going the other way, intersecting with it. And then, if you're really artistic, draw the little connecting nucleotides so that it looks like a twisty ladder. You got it? Go ahead and start drawing that. Your two squiggly intersecting lines, your connecting nucleotides. Somebody already got your twisty ladder that I can... Oh yeah, you've already got it. Okay, it's beautiful. And now you can mark all of the ribosomes on there. It'll take you a little while. Here's how we're going to picture this. And I want you to have this picture in your minds. This is what we do with our Summit Ministries staff. If you ask anybody who works for our ministry, what is your job? They will tell you. They will draw this little picture, and they will say, the DNA of influence has two strands, truth and relationship. So make one of those little strands truth, the other one relationship. And then they will tell you, my job every day is to connect truth and relationship for somebody. That is my job. Now, they'll go on to tell you, and I drive a bus, or I am security, or whatever it happens to be, but they will tell you that is my job. There are two strands to the DNA of influence, truth and relationship. My only job is to connect truth and relationship for somebody every day. Is that helpful? So right off the bat, we can understand, oh, well, that makes sense because Peter is telling us that's how we need to do this. We need to be able to give an answer. We need to be able to do it with gentleness and respect. So when Sean first called and said, we got this event called 315, I have to tell you, Sean, you had me at 315. Because I knew immediately what this event was about, and I was on board with it. And I'm very excited to be here. I'd love to give you just a little bit of a biography of my own story to show you how this might make sense with everything else that we're doing. I was born in Detroit, Michigan. And when I was a little kid, Detroit fell into riots. You may have followed the riots that took place in the spring and summer of 2020 in the States. The riots in Detroit were so bad that more buildings were destroyed, more people died, more people went to the hospital, more people were arrested in the city of Detroit than in all of the United States put together in the summer of 2020. So it's a pretty horrifying place to grow up. And I have to say right up front, I did not cause these riots. I was a baby at the time. But it did affect my life. You grow up in a place where people have had a real trauma and they're wary, they're cynical. I was offered hard drugs for the first time in my life at 7 years of age by a dealer standing outside of our elementary school. I remember watching the body of a heroin overdose victim be wheeled out of the house across the street and asking my mother why the ambulance people had a sheet over the face of the person. How can they breathe? I remember cowering under my bed at the sound of a gunshot in the street as police battled bad guys right in front of our house. It's a pretty rough place to grow up. And my parents were not used to this. They had moved to Detroit, Michigan for the job opportunities available at the time. But they were from Kansas and Oklahoma. So when I was almost 10 years of age, our family moved from Detroit, Michigan to Great Bend, Kansas. Here's a picture of Great Bend, Kansas during rush hour. As you can tell, pretty intense place to live. And we loved it because we felt a sense of freedom. My parents felt that the place was safe, so we had a little more freedom as kids. And growing up in a small town, that's pretty great if you were one of the privileged few who had that happen for you. But the church situation was a little unique for us. We went to a little church, and our family walked in. It was such a small church that our family of four increased attendance by 20% just by walking in the door. Best attendance day they've ever had. And then my parents asked, do you have things for kids? Well, not really, but we kind of work it all out. So we went to a Wednesday night prayer meeting, and my parents said to my brother and me, we were just not even, I think it was just about 10 or 11 years of age, and he was 2 years younger than me. My parents said, boys, we're going to have a prayer meeting. We're going to be in the sanctuary just down on our knees and praying. And why don't you boys just play outside? So we played baseball for a little while, and that was fine, but then we decided to explore the property, and we found that they had a shed, and inside the shed was a lawnmower. And I told my little brother, Scott, if there is a lawnmower, that means there's gasoline. And we can do a lot with gasoline. So we snuck back into the church, down into the basement, trying not to disrupt the prayer, found some Dixie cups, masking tape, matches. We made a gasoline bomb and lit it in the parking lot of the church during Wednesday night prayer meeting. Now, fortunately, no buildings or cars were harmed in this exercise. But to my brothers and my amazement, the next week, they had a youth group. So we went to it. It was just the two of us. And our guide's name was Don. We loved that guy. He loved us. We got to go over to his house to eat meals, and he just treated us the way you would think a friendly uncle would treat you. And we knew that not only did he love us, but that all the people in the church loved us. It was never a question that we felt accepted there. But as we got a little bit older and we began asking questions, some of the things that were coming up in our school, how do we know there really is a God? How do we know that God is as he is described in the Bible? Because there are lots of different ideas about God. How do we know this one is the correct one? How do we know that we were created rather than that we evolved? Why should we take the words of Scripture as something more than just inspirational teaching? Why should we say that it has authority? And I mean, we had it in little kids' language, but that was essentially the question that we were asking. And we found that when we asked those questions, the common response was, you just need to have faith. And in my little mind, I was thinking, yes, I want to have faith, but is faith blind by its nature? Shouldn't there be answers to these questions? And we realized as we were growing up that there were a lot of people in our church who loved us dearly, but they had somehow grown up believing that asking questions is doubting, and doubting is sinning. So I decided when I graduate from high school, I am going to very quietly and respectfully graduate from church. I don't know what it's like all over the world, but there was a study done by an organization in Nashville, Tennessee called Lifeway of mostly Baptist churches. And they found that 2/3 of the young adults who were significantly involved in church in their high school years were no longer even attending church by the time they reached their mid-20s. They had lost the plot. My parents could see this getting ready to happen to me, and they arranged for me to go to a place called Summit Ministries. It's in a little hippie town in Manitou Springs, Colorado. And I say little hippie town, this is my home. I have great reverence. My neighbors have very different worldviews. They're much more likely to fly Buddhist prayer flags from their front porch than they are to fly American flags from their front porch, which is kind of even an American tradition. Somebody asked me, I bet they're really liberal politically. I bet they all voted for Bernie Sanders. I said, I don't think you understand my neighbors yet. They think Bernie Sanders is way too conservative to be president of the United States. Just gives you a little bit of an idea. But in the middle of this place is a hotel called the Grandview. It's an antique hotel built in 1889. And I went to that building because my parents had said they're going to help you find answers to your big questions. I walked in and found the founder, the president of Summit Ministries, David Noble. I did not know that he was a renowned philosopher, but I said to him, I hope you have a lot of answers because I have a lot of questions. What would you say to a young person at that moment? His response changed the course of my life. He didn't say, just listen, kid, we'll give you all of the answers. He said, at Summit, we aren't afraid of questions. We aren't afraid of questions. Somehow that made me feel comforted. I knew that finding answers to life's difficult questions is not easy, and that it would never get any easier, but I at least wanted to be walking alongside people who were looking for answers. That changed the course of my life specifically because ultimately through that program, the following year, I came to a personal saving faith in Jesus Christ. Now I have the privilege of leading that ministry. And we now have the privilege together in our intensive programs of training 70,000 young people every year in biblical worldview and apologetics in outposts all over the world. We've been able to train 1.4 million young people in a biblical worldview and watch as they move into positions of influence in the culture. But we always begin in the same place, and it's where I'd like to really begin in the time that we have this morning. Because regardless of whether you embrace biblical truth or whether you're a seeker or whether you're kind of skeptical or whether you're thinking maybe the way I was thinking when I was young, that these people are really nice, but I don't think they really have answers. I don't think they're really thinking that much. No matter where you are in all of this, there is one question that we all have to grapple with in our lives, and that is, how do we find meaning in a fleeting life? How do we find meaning? A lot of different people come up with all kinds of different answers to that question. But I'll just give you a statistic here right off the bat. My wife Stephanie said I can use one statistic per talk. If I use more than one, please do not tell her. But here it is. 1 out of every 1 person dies. Shocker, right? Someday this life is going to come to an end. And what do we do with all of those who are struggling with anxiety and depression? What if you're struggling with anxiety and depression? What about finding a sense of meaning? Most of the young adults we work with today say they do not have a sense of purpose that gives meaning to their lives. And that kind of comes and goes. When you have children at home, then that gives you a sense of purpose, but what about when they're gone? Or if you have to change your job, or you get divorced, or there's all these different things that happen in life that make you think, what is the point of all of this? In my town, in Manitou Springs, Colorado, whenever people have an idea, they basically, they just get a bumper sticker. That's what happens. They get a bumper sticker. So you can tell exactly how many ideas a person has had in their life by how many stickers they have on that car. And each one of those stickers, and as they say in Texas, bless your heart, right? Because what it means is, okay, you felt like you had a breakthrough there, right? That's why you got the coexist bumper sticker or whatever. You had a breakthrough. It's like, if we could all just get along, then we would all get along. Oh, that's cool. Let me get a sticker. And they put that on the car. And then they have some other insight. If I just don't eat meat anymore, then I'm going to be better off. Or if I become a witch and I embrace Wicca or whatever, then I'm going to be better off. But people have all of these ideas. Here's the thing that will sort of anchor our discussion this morning, because it seems so complicated. And you could look at bumper stickers and realize, man, there's so many ideas. How could I ever understand all of these and why people embrace them? But then you could go to a library and realize, oh, well, there are actually billions of these ideas. How can I ever understand them all so that I can give a reason for the hope that I have and do it with gentleness and respect? So we at Summit Ministries use this term, worldview. Worldview. I define worldview as a pattern of ideas about God and life. That is the key word right there, pattern. It's a pattern of ideas about God and life. In any different field of study, you focus on patterns. So let's say you run a business. If you tell me what kind of business you're in, I can understand a little bit of the patterns. If you say, I'm in retail, or I'm in merchandising, or I am in manufacturing, or I am in the storage business, or I'm in the AI business, or whatever it is, you can only succeed in that business if you understand the patterns of success in that business. Raise your hand if you played a sport in school or are currently playing a sport of some kind, all right? When you play a sport, you have to understand the patterns of play. You have to understand this is what our team is going to do to try to get ourselves into scoring position. And then when the other team does this, we're going to try to stop them from getting into scoring position by doing these things. And the goal is to find the patterns of play that lead to success. Here's the simple point for this first session. Ideas also flow in patterns. Ideas flow in patterns. Let me illustrate this to you. If I ask you, do you believe in God? Your answer to that question, either yes or no, or I believe God is a person, or I believe God is a force like in Star Wars, whatever your answer to that question is, will tell me what you believe about the nature of reality itself. Is this world real, or is it an illusion? And that will tell me how you make your everyday decisions. The average person makes 20 to 30,000 decisions a day. And some of them are fairly mundane. Do I turn right at this intersection, or do I turn left? Do I eat the peas separately from the potatoes or together? But over time, the decisions we make every day establish another pattern. That's called ethics, how we make those decisions about what makes a good life and how we pursue it. What you believe about God will determine what you believe about that. It will also determine what place you give to science in your life. It will also tell me what you believe about what makes a healthy person, what makes a healthy society, what makes a good set of laws, what makes a good political structure, what makes a good economic structure, and ultimately how we understand overall from the beginning until now where humans are headed. You see that? That one decision that you make establishes patterns that affect every other area of life. At Summit Ministries, this is the picture of the book up there is one that I co-authored with my mentor, David Noble, called Understanding the Times. And in that book, it's a textbook, 500 pages, 1,700 footnotes, documenting all the things that we're talking about. If you're the kind of person who really wants to go deep, you could take a look at that as a follow-up to everything that we're doing this morning. But don't freak out yet. I just want to show you 6 different patterns of ideas. So you can see them on the screen there, so I'll move out of the way a little bit. I want you to say them with me as we go from left to right. First pattern is Christianity, then Islam, then secularism, then Marxism, then New Spirituality, then postmodernism. Are those all of the patterns of ideas that there are in the world? Could there be hundreds? Yeah, there could there be thousands? There could be thousands of patterns of ideas. Some of them are a little bit funny. Different people, national governments like to know what people are thinking. So they send out surveys. Does your government do this? You get your surveys in the mail? We get one, so we're supposed to, in our country, get one survey every 10 years, and they're to ask one question: how many people live at your house? Right, that's it. But they've added on over time questions like, how many rooms are in your house? What is your net worth? All these things. And most Americans, their approach to this is, we don't really want you to know. I don't know if you have that sort of rebellious spirit. Where I live in Colorado, that's kind of it. Like, everybody's attracted to the state because they just don't want to do what everybody else tells them to do. And so they just throw it in the trash. And then somebody has to come to the door and ask the one question they're permitted to ask, which is, how many people live in your house? In other countries, they love filling out the surveys. So people love studying Switzerland. You ever wondered why Switzerland always gets studied in social science studies? Because their people fill out answers to questions on everything. Like, what religion are you? How often do you go to church? What religion are your children? How often do they go to the church? And the Swiss are like, oh, the government needs to know. And they fill out. Other nations, like the UK, our forebears, they have developed a rather more funny and cynical attitude toward these surveys. They fill them out, but they make up stuff. So their government did the survey asking people, what is your religion? And they ran campaigns to see how many responses they could get. This is how we know, as a matter of statistical fact, that 176,632 people in England and Wales are Jedi. You're like, it all makes sense now. Alec Guinness playing Obi-Wan Kenobi, the British accent. Okay, it all makes sense now. They're British. By the way, there are also 6,242 people who worship heavy metal music in Great Britain, so that's cool. That's good if you're Black Sabbath and you're trying to sell albums. So anyway, you see there are a lot of different ideas, but why would we only study a few? Because again, our goal is not to try to lock down all information. That's just impossible. The goal is to learn how to identify patterns. Make sense? So if we study 6, then that will help us understand how virtually everybody around us thinks. Let me begin with kind of the basic one that your country and my country, I would say, probably struggle with the most, and that is secularism. Secularism. Secular comes from a Latin word meaning to an age of a person. So you would, in the Greek, it would be eon. In English, it would be century. In Latin, it's seculum. Secular means to an age of a person. In other words, what happens during your lifetime is all that matters. The physical universe is broken. Humanity is broken because we are ignorant. And we're ignorant because we are religious. And if we get rid of religion and recognize that only the material world exists, that's why the key word is matter, only the material world exists, there's no God, no Jesus, no heaven, no hell, no Holy Spirit, no demons, none of that, only the material world exists, then we will all be better off. That's what the secular worldview says. It is in many ways a counterfeit worldview of Christianity. And if you talk to secularists, people who might call themselves new atheists or whatever, you will very quickly, within the first paragraph or two, you will hear them proclaim what they believe, and you will hear them do it as a counterpoint to Christianity. Right? You've heard the old joke, an atheist, a vegan, and a CrossFitter walk into a bar. You haven't heard this? Okay. Everybody, we know that this happened because they told everyone within 3 minutes. That's essentially where this worldview is. But they will tell you, We are against what you believe as Christians. We think that you are ignorant and that your ignorance and superstition make the world worse. If we're going to get rid of ignorance and superstition, we're going to have pure logic, pure reason, and that is going to lead us to a better world. And so it's not that God discussions don't ever happen anymore. That's not really what takes place. What takes place is that they're dismissed. Somebody might say, well, you have your personal beliefs, but don't impose your morality on us. Or don't you dare vote based on your religious beliefs. You need to vote based on secular reason like all the rest of us, right? That's kind of how it happens. I had an encounter that sort of explains this a little bit. I was speaking at a secular event, and I was speaking on leadership practices. A lady came up to me after my presentation and asked me point blank, and this again was not a Christian audience, not a Christian event. She asked me point blank, do you believe in God? I said, I do believe in God. And she said, do you believe that God is everywhere present? I said, I do. I remember that from my catechism. I believe that. She glared at me and she said, I would never teach my child that. And I asked her, why not? She said, because it's creepy. I was just thinking, I don't know. I mean, it's comforting to me that God is everywhere present. Why would she say that it's creepy? And all of a sudden, it just dawned on me. She's approaching the world from a secular viewpoint. She does not actually believe that God exists. She might tell her child about God. If the child says, Mommy, I'm having bad dreams, she might say, let's pray to God for you to have good dreams. But she would do so in the same way that she might teach her child, say, about the tooth fairy. Now, the tooth fairy, it's distressing when a child loses a tooth. Well, the first time it happens to a child, some of them actually take it to its logical conclusion. My tooth fell out. Body parts can fall off. And they're distressed by this, so the parent comforts them. Put your tooth under the pillow, and in the morning there will be a prize. The tooth fairy will come and give you a prize. Tooth fairy at my house when I was a kid, turns out was a real cheapskate. 25 cents right there, baby. Don't spend it all in one place. I asked the students this summit last summer, what is it now? What's under the pillow now? They're like $10. Like, are you serious? And here I kept blaming Joe Biden for inflation. It's the tooth fairy all along. You teach your child about the tooth fairy. Then you teach your child about other things that you know aren't true, but you think might bring them a little bit of comfort. And then you realize why she would say that it's creepy, because if God doesn't actually exist, but we tell our children that he does exist and that he is always watching them, then that is a form of manipulation. You see? It's creepy. Let's be honest. It's like Santa Claus. Yes. Okay? Can we be honest about this? He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. Oh, it's worse than that. He knows if you've been bad or good. So be good, for goodness sake. Oh, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. You put some Jaws music to that? You're like, yeah, fully creepy. I get it. Fully creepy. But you see, the secular worldview proceeds from the assumption that we tell our kids all kinds of things we think are fun or that were nice traditions from when we were growing up, but we don't actually believe that it's true. We have to create a world as if there is no God. Now, a big part of this project was in the field of psychology. If you ever took a class in psychology, then you're going to recognize this name immediately. Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow. He was a psychologist, lived in the 1900s, very famous, wrote a book called Toward a Psychology of Being. And in his book, and this is the part you will recognize if you've ever taken a class in psychology, or probably in education as well, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've ever seen this before? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He said, well, here's how this works as human beings. We have physiological needs. We need food, water, and rest. And if you don't get those needs met, then you can't get your higher needs met. You have to have those things met first. And it is observably true that people who are starving don't think a lot about what their next job is going to be. They think about what they need to do to get food. So in that sense, it's true. The second one is safety or security. And then if those needs are met, then you go on to try to have your needs for love or belonging met, for intimate relationships and friendships. And then you go on to esteem or feelings of accomplishment. And ultimately, if all of these needs are met, then you can become self-actualized and achieve your full potential. What Maslow was proposing is a secular form of salvation. Here's how you get saved, being that there is no God. Because we all know we're broken. We all know we need salvation. Here's how you get it. The thing is, the only way to get that kind of salvation is for other people to meet those needs for you. Do you see that? In other words, you don't have agency because you are not a person who is made in the image of God. The only way you can get anywhere in life that you need to go is if other people do things for you. This led in the United States to a massive movement to try to flow more of the economy toward the control of the federal government. Because the federal government collecting all the resources and redistributing them would make it more likely that we could meet people's needs and that they therefore would become self-actualized. Now, when I was a little kid, I told you I grew up in Detroit. It's a rough place, so hopefully you'll forgive me for telling this story. But I was a hoodlum by the time I was in kindergarten. In kindergarten, one day, I hit a kid in the mouth with a big wooden block because he had the fire truck, and I wanted the fire truck. My teacher did not think this was an appropriate way to handle the situation. My mother did not think this was an appropriate way to handle the situation. But Abraham Maslow would say it was inevitable that the situation would be handled this way, because the teacher, by only putting certain toys in the toy box, had artificially created scarcity to create conflict on purpose so that she could control us in her classroom. The solution was not for me to not learn how to not hit other kids in the mouth with a big wooden block. The solution was for my teacher to provide more fire trucks. You see that? That's Abraham Maslow's idea. And I'm not saying that he believed this without any evidence. He actually said this. The needs for safety, belonging, love relationships, and for respect can be satisfied only by other people, i.e. only from outside the person. This means considerable dependence on the environment. You are not a person who has agency and can make decisions for yourself. You are a victim. That is your primary identity. That flows from the secular worldview. Is this helping make sense of some of the different things you even see in the media and the way people approach things? Let me give you some others here. Let's talk about new spirituality. This is a term that we essentially coined at Summit Ministries to describe what some people think about as New Age. New spirituality. New spirituality focuses on oneness. Now, whereas a secular worldview says only the physical or material world exists, the spiritual world is an illusion, the new spiritualist worldview says only the spiritual world exists, the material world is an illusion. And you say, but how can that be? Well, most people don't embrace this because they read the Bhagavad Gita and they study Hinduism. They don't read the Upanishads. They don't study the writings of Gautama Buddha. They basically just watch Star Wars. They're like, yeah, I think that's actually true. And there was this famous scene, Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by the inimitable Alec Guinness, talking to Luke Skywalker about the Force, and he says, the Force is what gives the Jedi its power. It's an energy field created above all living things. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together. That's my only imitation of Alec Guinness. And Luke goes, what? I don't understand what you're talking. Are you saying that the reality that I perceive is not what's actually real? And that is the point on which the entire series develops. That the Force is what's real, not the physical things that we see around us. And you say, but I don't understand how that could be. I mean, that chair right there clearly has a form to it. How would a new spiritualist explain that? Well, I would look at it and say, well, there's some metal right here, and there's some wood, and then there's some material and a padding there, all of that. But what is it actually? And you would say, well, it's atoms. But is it really atoms? Because when you look at things that take up physical space, it's the space between the atoms that actually gives it the shape. What is the space between the atoms? It is nothing material. That's what new spiritualists say. So most of reality is not at all what it appears to be. You say, but I don't, again, you're going to have to prove this to me because I don't know that people actually believe that. Well, they do. I mean, all these different worldviews, you can see this. But the Dalai Lama is a Buddhist leader, probably the spiritual leader of Buddhism. He said, just as there is no chair to be found among its parts and no rose to be found among its petals, so there is no person to be found among its constituent aspects of body and mind. Just as he's saying, this chair is mostly nothing, we also as human beings are mostly nothing. We don't have souls. The Dalai Lama is quite clear in his writings. He writes evangelistic books for Buddhism. He's quite clear in his writings that the Christian teaching that we have souls is the most dangerous idea that is held in humanity. That's new spirituality. All right, let's do a few more, and then we'll have time to sort of unpack and process this as we go. But let's talk about Marxism. Marxism made quite a comeback in North America in the last few decades. We thought maybe it was gone with the demise of the Soviet Union and the fall of communist strongholds throughout Eastern Europe. But Marxism, when the key word for this is revolution, essentially says only the material world exists, and the humans are broken because the rich took more than their fair share. Now think about this for a second. If only the material world exists, okay, just imagine that for a minute. Can we make more rocks? Can we make more land? Can we make more water? No, I mean, it is what it is. There's only so much to go around. Would you agree? If only the material world exists, there is only so much to go around. So why is it that you live on 5 acres of land and I live on 1? Clearly, you've taken approximately 2 or 2.5 acres away from me. And if somebody has no land at all, then both of us have taken something from them. If there's only so much to go around and it's not equally distributed, then somebody is a thief. And how do you know who the thief is? Because they have more, period. End of sentence. By definition, that's the way the world works. So Marxism is essentially secularism weaponized. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to force redistribution? And this is where Karl Marx comes into play. He said in the Communist Manifesto, the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Proletarians of all countries unite. Does anybody have the Communist Manifesto as a reading assignment in school? Okay, some of you did. It's not very common these days, but I will tell you, Karl Marx's favorite word in the Communist Manifesto is the word abolish. If my count is correct, he used the word abolish 33 times in the Communist Manifesto. What does he want to abolish? First of all, he wants to abolish the economic structure, specifically the abolition of private property. The idea that you would own anything needs to be abolished. Why? Because it's clearly unequal. There's only so much to go around. Some people have more. To him, that's proof enough that the economic structure needs to be abolished. Second of all, the government needs to be abolished. Political power, he said, and these are quotes from the Communist Manifesto, properly so-called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. Why does the government need to be abolished? Because the government is made up of people who make rules like thou shalt not steal only after they already stole everything that's worthwhile. So that's clearly cynical, that's rigged, we need to get rid of that. Third, and this surprises a lot of people, the abolition of family. The abolition of family. Why was this so important to Karl Marx? He wrote extensively about this, so did Friedrich Engels, so did Lenin. And they said the family structure of a mom and a dad and kids, by definition, will always perpetuate the existing system. The only way to get a revolution is to make sure the mom and dad never get married. Make sure if they do get married that they don't have kids. If they do have kids, make sure that you take those kids away from the parents for as much of the day as possible so that you can train them to reject what their parents believe. Only by doing that can you have a revolution. And you can go back and read the Communist Manifesto. You will see that I'm not even exaggerating in this. Fourth, religion needs to be abolished. He says communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. There's a new morality that comes into play. Not the idea of right or wrong or thou shalt not steal, but a morality based on what is good for the working class versus what is good for their oppressors. And if we do things that hurt the oppressors, that's by definition a moral thing to do. Even killing them is moral because they are the source of all of the world's evil. Do you see where Karl Marx is going with this? You see how when you just start with one of these core assumptions, even about the nature of reality, it leads to all of these other ideas. All right, let's do two more, and then we'll do a Q&A session for a few minutes to take a break. Let's do Islam. Now, Islam, Judaism, Christianity are all monotheistic religions. They all proclaim the existence of one God. There is a God named Allah who is the creator of the universe. Now, here's where the story of brokenness from an Islamic perspective departs from where Christians go with this. To Islam, and this you will learn if you read the Quran, everybody who has ever been born in the history of the world was born Muslim, according to the Quran. Everyone who's ever been born was born Muslim. If you are not Muslim now, it is because you are in rebellion against Allah. And the Quranic prescription for rebellion against Allah is this word that you hear pretty often, jihad. Jihad, it's mentioned multiple times in the Quran, is the solution. And this is why, if you are in certain Islamic nations, you will hear people talk about the house of peace versus the house of war. So your country, Canada, is a house of war. My country, the United States, is a house of war. Why? Because not everybody has been forced to submit to Allah in the way the Quran prescribes. That would change if we were all forced to, therefore, submit. Now, most people, your Muslim neighbors and friends, view jihad as a struggle against sin. You would see some parallels even between the way they would approach this and Ramadan and so forth as kind of similar to the way Christians practice Lent. But there are a number of people in the world, including entire nations of the world, ruled by people who believe that this is a military command, that you must forcibly submit people, or forcibly require people to submit to Allah in the way the Quran prescribes. So if you start with that, then you end up with a whole worldview coming out of that as well. All right, do we have mental space for one more? And then we're going to take a few minutes for questions. Postmodernism. Now, this is kind of a weird one to throw in there because a postmodernist essentially says, my worldview is that I reject all worldviews. Postmodernist says, the physical universe is all there is. Humanity is broken because those in power force everyone else to submit to their idea of ultimate truth. They would criticize Islam, but they would also criticize Christianity. They criticize secularism. They criticize anybody, Marxists. They will criticize anybody who says, we know what the truth is, and because we are in power, we're going to make you do what we want. That's what they would be reactive to. Redemption comes to regarding all such claims with suspicion. That's why the key word is suspicion, and focusing instead on our own socially constructed personal experiences. So if you hear people say things like, you can't know what is true for me, then you're hearing someone speak from a postmodern perspective. They're essentially saying that if you claim to know the truth, like if you base your argument on facts, that by definition is oppressing me, because if I don't like your facts or I don't agree with your facts, then you're simply trying to make your worldview objective in a way that discounts my life experience. That's how the postmodern perspective works. It did make a little bit of headway in philosophy. Mostly, if you went to a university, you're going to probably get this in fields like sociology or English literature, more than you would say in philosophy. But there were some philosophers. Martin Heidegger, for example, he was a German philosopher. He wrote this in a book called Poetry, Language, and Thought. In the naming, the things named are called into their thinging. Thinging, they unfold world in which things abide, and so are the abiding ones. And all God's people said, huh? Yeah, what am I to do with this? Is he actually saying the physical world doesn't exist? No. He's saying that your experience is what makes existence knowable. So this table, before you came in this room and saw it, it for you did not exist. Because you had never seen it and didn't take it into account. Now that you see that it has a particular use, then you might take it into account, but that doesn't mean there is such a thing as tableness. Okay, there are no categories of meaning that exist independent of our ability to perceive them. Now, I shared this at a university once. I put that quote up there by Martin Heidegger. The students all laughed. There was a professor who was quite upset. He came up to me afterward and said, well, of course you would pick the one thing from Martin Heidegger that sounds silly to make everybody laugh. I said, have you ever read Martin Heidegger? I said, I've read more than 1,000 pages of this guy's books, and I have to tell you, this is by far the clearest thing he ever said. But that is the postmodern perspective. When we come back into our next session, we're going to talk about biblical Christian worldview, which focuses on healing or redemption, and we'll talk about that and go a little bit deeper into why that is so compelling and how we can explain it to other people. But I won't take the time to do that right now because we have an entire session set up to do this. Sean, did anybody put in questions yet?
Yeah, I got a few.
You got a few questions. All right. So Sean's going to grab a chair. I think we're going to sit down here. He's going to ask questions, and I'm going to make up answers. Do y'all ask hard questions of speakers, or are you more like, what's your favorite color, kind of? Okay. Guess I'm about to find out.
First one, so what thingy do you think is the most important thingy to focus on?
I'm really counting on the thingy of this chair right now. I truly am. Yeah. It's a lot at stake.
Okay, here's a couple things. Let me just bring up my notes here. Where do you think Christians most commonly drift from a biblical worldview without realizing it?
You know, I don't meet so many Christians who will embrace one of these counterfeit worldviews in total. I do meet a few people like that, but for the most part, Christians depart from the truth by using themselves rather than Scripture as the standard for what is true. So they could say, oh, the secularists say we need to use our reason. That makes sense to me. Or the new spiritualists say that reason can't really exist. Yeah, that kind of makes sense too. I can see their viewpoint. And they end up just sort of making themselves the basis for what decisions they make about what they think is true or untrue, rather than looking for something that's a North Star. I think we need to really get to know God through Scripture, and we need to recognize that Scripture is like a compass. It points toward a truth that is knowably true. And when we talk about truth changes everything, which I know you have that book if people want to pick that up, that was the whole point of that book, is that from a biblical perspective, truth exists. And it isn't just a set of facts. It's not just a logical proposition. It's not a mathematical formula. It's a person. It's Jesus. That makes Christianity consistent with the way philosophers understand the world, but it also elevates it beyond it. It's not just the arguments that we can make that demonstrate to us that something is true. It's the fact that God has actually revealed himself in Scripture, and therefore what is knowably true is knowably true. And Christians easily forget that.
That's good. What's the difference between having Christian beliefs and actually thinking Christianly? Put it that way.
Yes, so I think there are 4 levels here. I would start with the word idea. An idea is a thought or conception about reality. A belief is an idea that you hold to be true. But there are other levels. A conviction. People talk about having a conviction about something. A conviction is a belief you're willing to sacrifice for. Like in a scarce world, you're going to choose it. And then finally, you have habits. A habit is the way you live based on your convictions. So to have a belief is significant. It means that you've considered enough about the ideas of the world to actually think that something might be true as opposed to something else. But if it doesn't attain the level of a conviction where you say, I believe this so strongly, I'm willing to feel embarrassed in a conversation with somebody who might disagree. Or I believe this so strongly that, I hope it never comes to this, God forbid, but if I ever had to lose my job because of this belief, I would think that it's worthwhile. That's a conviction. And then the habit is just what we regularly, consistently do. And, Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, be on your guard against false prophets. For they come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravaging wolves. You will recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. Every tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire, so you will recognize them by their fruit. And then you're like, oof, that's a pretty tough teaching. Oh, just wait. What he says next is, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, do many miracles in your name? And I will announce to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you lawbreaker. So this is serious, that we need to begin asking the question, how do my everyday habits reflect what I know to be true? Because if they don't, can I really say that I believe it? Can I really even say that I know it?
Why did neo-Marxism gain such traction after the fall of communism in the late 80s? Why do you think?
So what happened in the 1980s, and there is a theory of secularization, and it's a Canadian philosopher who was the key guy behind this. Essentially, people just quit believing that anything exists other than the material world. They just, like, you know what, I've lived just fine without ever even thinking about God. I'm still making money, I can get groceries, I enjoy my family. You know, maybe God's not really that significant, not that important. That secularization, that loss of the sense of the profound nature of reality, positioned people to embrace whatever materialism produces. And I will say, having studied this for a long, long time, if you believe that only the material world exists, Marxism is the only logical conclusion. So then redistribution is the only logical conclusion from that. How does it happen? You can disagree. Should it be a violent revolution or should it be government edict? But it's got to happen because only the material world exists. Marxism is a thoroughly modern worldview that is deeply rooted philosophically. Well, I should at least put it this way. Marxists write a lot. They write a lot. They never stop writing. Millions and millions of words about their view. So in the States, you know, we get new people in the political realm like Zoran Mamdani. Mamdani in New York holds to this worldview. And but it's kind of a mashup because he also has an Islamic heritage, which is interesting. And there's often a lot more relationship between those two worldviews than people realize. Not everywhere in the world, but in a lot of countries of the world. So people are asking, so what happened? How did he get elected? Well, he's good looking. He had a great social media campaign. People were tired of the way things had been going before. All the reasons why political winds change. But I think we were preconditioned for it by a materialistic view that everything in the world can be explained through a victim versus perpetrator rubric. And that if we recognize that all of us are victims and there is somebody out there persecuting us, then we have something to stand against. You're almost always going to vote for the Marxist at that point. Is it okay to give answers like that?
How do you argue universal truth with your postmodern neighbor and stay friends?
Yeah, so the way to know your postmodern neighbor is consistent is that they talk to you. Or inconsistent is that they talk to you. Because you would never actually say anything if the claims of postmodernism were true. Because if everything is meaningful only because the person hearing it interprets it, then you never get to, you don't even have a right to your view. I mean, you can't even say, is it a nice day outside? Because there's not a knowable fact. There's no such category of reality as nice. And there's no point in even communicating with me because we can't understand each other. So we use language and then we use logic. So the way I do this with postmodernists is I ask them, you know, if they'll usually clue me in saying something like, well, that may be true for you, but that's not true for me. Say, well, okay, let me start with some basic things here just to see where we are. Do you believe that it's true that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level? Is that a fact that we can rely on? And, you know, and they will usually say yes. It depends on atmospheric conditions. Sure, of course, but we can understand them. What about a historical fact? Was Martin Luther King killed in April of 1968? Now, an inappropriate response would be, well, maybe he was killed in April of 1968 for you, but how dare you impose your morality on me? That wouldn't be an appropriate response, nor would the response be to, if I'm using the Fahrenheit scale, to look at 212 degrees, is the water boiling or not? So if those things are true, is it possible that there are moral facts? So I can make a statement like, tell me if this is my own opinion or if this is true. It should always be wrong to torture innocent puppies for fun. And you realize right away, our entire existence revolves around the statement of and the defense of moral facts. We have a stop sign. Why? Because somebody realized when cars riding around this area don't stop, they crash into each other. Well, why do we care if they crash into each other? Because if they crash into each other, people might get hurt. Well, why do we care if people get hurt? I mean, maybe if people are just crashing into each other, they should just die and get out of our way. No, we've decided that human beings are unique and uniquely valuable, and that it is our common citizenly responsibility to protect one another. And so we put a government in place that figures out where the stop signs need to go so that we can all stay safe, because we have a belief, whether we deny it or not, that human beings are special and bear the image of God. So that's how I kind of approach it with my postmodern neighbor. Now, it doesn't always go that smooth. I mean, we're just playing it out.
Fair enough.
But if you say, if in the conversation you say, I feel like I should be really whip smart on this, I've watched a lot of videos, I should know what to say, but the truth is I don't. I feel nervous when questions like this come up. And I'm glad we're friends, because it might take some time to kind of play this out. Is that okay? And just be honest about it.
What religion do you think draws the most away from Christianity, or maybe what's some of the biggest challenge out there? With even looking at some of these different worldviews that you've talked about, which one would you say would be one that's maybe more popular than others right now?
The fastest growing one in the world right now is Islam. Islam does have a theory of evangelism. It does admit conversion, but it grows primarily through the family structure. So people are born into a Muslim family and they embrace it. Now, a lot of Muslims are like a lot of Christians. They don't really know what they believe. They don't really think about it a lot. So this is, it's a big trick. And there are different kinds of Islam. So I don't know if you woke up to the news this morning that my country is now involved in war actions against Iran. That would be worth a question at some point here today. What kind of Islam is that? What's the difference between Sunni and Shia? And, what is the particular threat that our country is concerned about when it comes to Iran specifically? I think in the hearts of people, anything that allows us to evade accountability to truth is going to grow pretty fast. Anything that allows you to say, I am the only one who determines what my identity is, and I do so outside of any relationship to any knowable truth or any human community, that's going to be pretty popular for people.
How do you approach, I'm going to read the question, I'm not sure, but maybe, how do you approach the humanistic self-affirmation push in even our Christian schools or even churches? Do you see some of that kind of worldview creeping into those institutions? Yeah, you're just fine the way you are sort of thing. Because we tell them every Sunday, come as you are, right? We want people here, wherever they are. But we don't want any of us to be walking out unchanged.
the way the Apostle Paul taught it in Romans 12 is, do not be conformed to the age. And by the way, the word age there is the word eon. When it gets translated into Latin, it was the word secular, seculum. Don't be conformed to the secular, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's what we want to have happen. If we're walking out of here saying, I was just affirmed so that I don't have to change, then we missed the point. So we have to be careful how we language this. We want people to come, wherever you're bringing, whatever baggage you have, whatever struggles you have, whatever joys you have, bring it all here. Bring it all here. This is your place. It's a safe place. But it's a safe place to think and to grow, not a place where you're safe from having to think or from having to grow, which is what safe spaces are when people talk about that. It was a big deal a few years ago on college campuses.
That's good. One more. What's the best way to respond to, that's true for you, but not for me?
Are we being a smart aleck on this one, or are we just...
You can take it whatever way you want.
If I have this conversation with one of my students and they trust me and we kind of have a little repartee, then I'll usually say to them, so then why are you imposing your morality on me? They'll say, well, I'm not. That's the entire point. Say, no. If you're telling me that something is true for you and not, that might be true for me, but not for you, you are actually telling me what is true for me. So why are you doing that? See, it's the funny thing about language, and it's true of every language in the world, that distinctions emerge between things. There is an actual difference between light and dark, and many other distinctions, one of which we'll talk about in church tomorrow. Yeah.
Let me just give you one more, because it's interesting. If Marxism does not believe in government, why are liberal governments the ones promoting secularism and the destruction of the family?
So Marxism's view is, we only ever get to see Marxism in transition. This is what Marxists say. That eventually, we won't need a government because the government only exists to enforce its will on other people, but if everybody's equal, then there's not anything to desire that anybody else has, therefore you don't need government. This is why in my country, the Marxists always, the first thing they always try to implement is abolish or defund the police. The police are by definition bad to a Marxist worldview. By definition, they're bad. They only exist to enforce the will of the people in power against those like us. So you ultimately wouldn't need a government. But in the meantime, during this transition period, the people who own more than their fair share are going to try to not let us do what we want to do. And so we have to have governmental authority to force them to do what we want to do. As an undergraduate, I majored in political science, and one of my major professors, one of the three professors I studied the most with, was a full-blown committed Marxist. So I had an early introduction to this. I read Das Kapital, which is mind-numbingly boring, from Karl Marx. But I read it, studied it, talked with my professors about it. But one time I did ask my Marxist professor, I said, so why does this never work? Why is it that every nation that commits itself to Marxism ends up imploding to the extreme detriment of the very people it was supposed to help? And his response was, well, the reason it never works is because whenever a country commits to Marxist principles, the countries that do not want Marxism to succeed band together and oppose it and bring about its failure. I said, so just taking this to the logical conclusion, if every country in the entire world was forced to be Marxist at the same time, then Marxism would work? And he said, yes. So I tell my students, if anyone ever tells you, give me control of the entire world and I will prove to you that I am right, you should just say, niet.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll take a little break.